Welcome to part 4 of this 8-part series where I dissect every difference between each Harry Potter book and movie. Today we're going to focus on the 4th book, The Goblet of Fire. Now if you've been on this channel for a while, you'll know that this is my least favorite of the Potter films. So I'm going to try to stay neutral, but I might take some shots at the truly bad parts. I think it's justified though, because these moments vastly alter the story when we compare the book to the movie, and comparing the book to the movie is the whole point of the video. If you haven't seen parts 1, 2, and 3, they're linked down below. Obviously, this book is huge compared to the first 3, so this is going to be a long video compared to the others, but you guys always say you enjoy the longer videos, so hopefully that's a good thing. Since this video is going to be so long, let's get right into it and get started. I'm going to start each of these videos with the character differences, so let's start with Voldemort. The movie did a pretty good job when adapting his appearance, but there was one huge difference, and that was the color of his eyes. In the book, he had red eyes, but in the film, that was not the case. Mad-Eye Moody had a ton of differences when he was adapted to the big screen. 1, he had gray hair in the book, but in the movie, he had blonde hair. 2, in the book, he had a wooden leg, but in the film, he had a metal leg. And 3, the film added a strap to go along with his eye, but in the book, he did not have a strap, the eye was just placed in his socket. As for Fleur Delacour, in the book she had silvery blonde hair, but in the film her hair was more dirty blonde. Also, her hair went down to her waist, but in the film it was not that long. On top of that, the movie never mentioned that Fleur was a quarter Vila, semi-human magical beings who resembled beautiful women irresistible to men. Rita Skeeter's glasses in the book had jewels around the frames, but in the film she did not have that. She also had 3 golden teeth that were prominent in her smile, but again, she did not have this in the film. Barty Crouch Jr. had blonde hair and freckles in the book, but in the movie, he has brown hair and no freckles. Igor Karkaroff had blue eyes in the book, but they were brown in the film. In the book, Amos Diggory had a beard, but he did not have this in the film. Cho Chang in the book had freckles on her nose, but in the movie, she did not. Also, now that we have a Ravenclaw character to highlight, I can talk about the crest on their robes. In the book, the Ravenclaw crest is an eagle, but in the movie, they made the mascot a raven instead. Also, the book had Ravenclaw's colors be blue and bronze, but in the film, they changed the colors to blue and silver. And just to explain something, the reason why the crest is an eagle and not a raven when raven is clearly in the name is because Rowling took the word raven as a synonym for black. So essentially, Ravenclaw means black claw, which eagles are of course known for, black claws. Also, I feel like people forget that Ravenclaw is not the only house to do this. Even though Gryffindor has Griffin in it, the mascot is not a griffin, it's a lion. But anyway, moving on, now we get to the plot. The movie starts with Frank Bryce in present day, but the book starts 50 years earlier, explaining the murders of the Riddle family, how Frank was arrested for their murder, but then released when they found no evidence or cause of death. In the movie, Barty Crouch Jr. was there with Voldemort and Wormtail, but in the book, he was not there with them. In the movie, Wormtail is the one to say Voldemort, which alerts the audience to the Dark Lord's presence there.
No, my Lord Voldemort.
But in the books, almost no one spoke his name, especially his followers. So in the book, Voldemort himself was actually the one to say his name for both Frank and the audience to hear. In this scene, the film left out their talk of Bertha Jorkin's disappearance, which we would later find out was the result of Wormtail kidnapping her and Voldemort killing her. But other than that, the dialogue is pretty much the same when we compare the book to the movie. Before Frank was killed in the book though, he bravely told Voldemort to face him like a man, but in the film, he just stood there silently and was killed without saying anything to them. In the movie, Harry wakes up at the Weasleys, but in the book, he woke up at the Dursleys. There's a lot that happens before he gets to the Weasleys. 1, Harry writes a letter to Sirius about his dream and his scar hurting, which in the film, he doesn't do until much later while on the Hogwarts Express. 2, Vernon gets mad at Harry because of a letter from Mrs. Weasley that was covered in stamps, and this made Vernon furious because the mailman laughed at him for it. 3, Mr. Weasley, the twins, and Ron show up to pick Harry by Floo powder, but the fireplace was blocked off because it was electric, so Mr. Weasley had to blast it open into the Dursleys' living room. Before heading back to the Weasleys, the twins purposefully dropped their joke candy knowing that Dudley would eat it, and his tongue grew at a rapid rate. Mr. Weasley fixed them up, and he, Harry, and the Weasley kids all go back to the burrow. The movie picked up the morning of the Quidditch World Cup, but they cut out everything that happened while Harry was staying at the burrow before the World Cup. Harry meets Bill and Charlie, Ron's older brothers, both of whom were of course cut out of the movie. We also get the introduction to Weasley's Wizard Wheezes in this book, but this was also cut out and it was not mentioned until the next movie. The movie also left out Percy's arc in this book, which was him starting work in the Ministry of Magic working for Barty Crouch. Percy was actually cut out of this movie entirely. There was not a single scene with him in it. And Chris Rankin, the actor for Percy, had no participation in the fourth film whatsoever. During the time at the Burrow that the film left out, there was a big fight between Mrs. Weasley and the twins about their joke products. Charlie and Bill used magic to make the tables in the backyard fight. We find out that Ginny named the owl that Sirius gifted to Ron, naming him Pigwidgeon, or Pig for short. And of course the dinner with all of the Weasleys, Harry, and Hermione. During this dinner is when we get our first mention of Victor Crumb, which in the movie doesn't happen until they're already at the Quidditch World Cup. Although he's just mentioned here, he's not explained. I'll get to the part where he's explained later in the video. This is then where the book and the film meet up again, as they wake up the next morning to go to the World Cup. In the movie, Hermione woke Harry and Ron up, but in the book, Mrs. Weasley did. Before leaving, the movie left out the twins getting mad at their mother for getting rid of all of their joke candy that they had spent the last 6 months developing. Also in the movie, Harry and Ron did not know where they were going.
Ron, where are we actually going?
Dunno.
Hey, Dad! Where are we going?
Haven't the foggiest. Keep up!
But in the book, they obviously knew their destination. In the film, they met Amos and Cedric about halfway to the Portkey and walked the rest of the way with them. But in the book, they met Amos and Cedric at the Portkey and they did not walk together. Also in the film, Cedric for some reason jumps out of a tree, but he did not do this in the book. He was just standing there normally. In the movie, the twins were the ones to explain the Portkey to Harry.
That isn't just any man-kill boot, mate.
It's a portkey.
But in the book, it was Mr. Weasley who explained Portkeys. Here is where we see Amos embarrass Cedric as Cedric tells his father to stop talking about him beating Harry last year in Quidditch. But in the movie, we don't really see this dynamic of Amos bragging and Cedric telling him to stop until right before the third task. In the film, Harry didn't grab onto the portkey until the last second, but in the book, Harry and everyone else was hanging onto it a minute before it even left. In the movie, they just walk into the campsite, but in the book, they have to go through the Muggle campgrounds owner Mr. Roberts to pay, a man who the wizards have to keep obliviating so he doesn't get suspicious of all of the magical activity going on his campsite. In the film, their tent was already set up for them, but in the novel, Harry, Hermione, and Mr. Weasley had to set it up themselves. Also, they had 2 tents in the novel, one for the girls and one for the boys, but in the film, they only had 1 tent. The movie cuts straight from the tent to the actual match, but there's a lot that happens in between these 2 scenes in the book. As the trio travels through the campsite, they see Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas, Oliver Wood, who we find out is playing professional Quidditch now, Ernie Macmillan, and Cho Chang. Seeing Cho here of course differs from the movie, because in the film, we don't see Cho until much later while on the Hogwarts Express. Also, this is when Cho makes Harry slop water down his front, whereas in the movie, this happens much later while in the Great Hall. As the trio is walking through the Bulgarian part of the campsite, they see posters of Victor Crumb all over, and this is where we get our first look at the Bulgarian Seeker and where he's actually explained, not just mentioned. As I said, in the movie, it's Fred and George who explain him. But in the book, it was Ron who explained him to Hermione and Harry. The movie cut out the character Ludo Bagman entirely, who was the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports and a former Quidditch player. This also meant that the film cut the bet that Fred and George made with Bagman on the match, betting their whole life savings that Ireland would win but Crumb would catch the snitch. While in the campgrounds, this is also where Harry met Barty Crouch for the first time, whereas in the movie, they don't meet until 6 months later after the second task. In the movie, the Weasleys had the worst seats in the stadium.
Blimey, Dad! How far up are we?
We'll put it this way. If it rains, you'll be the first to know.
But in the book, they were actually in the best seats thanks to Ludo Bagman, who arranged for them to be in the Minister of Magic's box. In the film, we saw the Malfoys as they were finding their seats, but in the book, they were both in the Minister's box, so they had their first meeting for this novel in there. Also, it wasn't just Draco and Lucius, but Narcissa, Draco's mother, was there as well. Here, we also meet Winky, who was cut from the film entirely, and just for some background on her, she was Barty Crouch's house elf. In the movie, Cornelius Fudge announced the match.
To the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup.
But in the book, Ludo Bagman was the one to announce it. In the movie, the Irish had one huge leprechaun as their mascot, but in the book, they had a whole flock of leprechauns. Also, the movie cut Bulgaria's mascots, which were Vila. The movie also cut the entire match, which ended just as the twins had predicted. Ireland won, but Crumb caught the snitch. This made Bagman pay the twins for their bet, which was a whole lot of money. In the book, everyone was asleep when the attack took place, and Mr. Weasley had to wake them all up. But in the movie, they were all awake, as they had not gone to bed yet.
We've got to get out of here. Now!
In the film, the Death Eaters just catch things on fire, but in the novel, they went after the Muggle campsite owners, levitating Mr. Roberts, his kids, and his wife, and they even laughed as they flipped his wife over to show off her underwear. In the film, Harry gets knocked out and separated from the others, but in the novel, these events play out very differently. Harry stays with Ron and Hermione the whole time, and they run into the woods. Here they see Malfoy, and this is where we get the idea that his father was part of the group of Death Eaters, while in the movie, this was shown through what Lucius said before the match.
Do enjoy yourself, won't you? While you can.
In the movie, Harry was alone in the campsite when the Dark Mark was cast, and he could see the silhouette of the man who did it. However, in the book, he saw it go up in the woods, not the campsite, and unlike in the film, he was not alone, as he had Ron and Hermione right next to him. Also, they could not see who cast it, as he was in the trees hidden from them, and was also under an invisibility cloak. On top of that, the Dark Mark in the movie was cast after all of the Death Eaters had already left, but in the book, it was cast in the middle of their riots, and when they saw it, it made them run for their lives, as they thought Voldemort was there. That was actually the whole point of Barty Jr. casting the Dark Mark, to scare the Death Eaters. So with them already gone in the movie, him casting the Dark Mark sort of loses its purpose as to why it was done. Just an example of the movie badly adapting the book. In the film, the group of wizards come after the trio in the campsite, but again, in the book, this happened in the woods. In the movie, they give up before they find a culprit.
All of you, this way!
But in the book, they do find a culprit, and they find Winky in the bushes, Barty Crouch's house elf, and she's accused of conjuring the Dark Mark. The movie cuts right from the scene of the crime to the Hogwarts Express, but there's a lot that happens in between these two scenes. We see everyone go back to the burrow where Mrs. Weasley cries and hugs the twins, so relieved that their last conversation wasn't the fight they had before they left. We also see Arthur read an article written by Rita Skeeter about this incident, and this is the first mention we get of her, whereas in the movie, we don't hear of her until much later while covering the 4 champions chosen for the tournament.
I'm Rita Skeeter.
We then spend another week at the Burrow before they head off to Hogwarts, all of which was cut from the film. In that time, we see Percy and Arthur work like crazy at the Ministry after this incident. They talk about how Rita Skeeter learned of Bertha Jorkin's disappearance. We see Ron get his dress robes, which is a big difference between the book and the movie, as he doesn't get his dress robes until midway through the school year in the film.
They're not for Ginny. They're for you. Dress robes.
During the week cut from the movie, we also see Mr. Weasley helping Mad-Eye Moody after he said there were intruders in his house the night before. This is the first mention we get of Mad-Eye, while in the film, we don't hear about him until they're already at Hogwarts. In the movie, Ron and Hermione are the ones to explain Moody's past as an Auror.
Alistair Moody. The Aura.
Aura?
Dark wizard catcher. Half the cells in Azkaban are filled thanks to him.
But in the book, it was Bill and Charlie who explained this. The movie also cut them getting to King's Cross and their time on platform 9 3/4 before boarding the train. Mrs. Weasley, Bill, and Charlie took them there in Muggle taxis, and while on the platform, Bill and Charlie gave Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and the twins hints about what was happening that year at Hogwarts. And they were of course referencing the Triwizard Tournament. The train ride in the book adds many details that the movie left out, such as the trio talking with Seamus, Dean, and Neville about the Quidditch World Cup. We also see Malfoy teasing Ron about his dress robes, as well as making fun of Ron and his father for not being in the know of what was to come that year, again referring to the Triwizard Tournament. The film also added the moment of Harry seeing Cho on the train, but this did not happen in the book, because as I said, this instead happened at the campsite at the World Cup. Also, Harry did not send Sirius a letter on the train like in the film, because again, this happened weeks earlier while he was still at the Dursleys. The movie cuts right from the train to everyone in the castle, but in between this and the book, we see Peeves throw water balloons at the kids as they walk in. We hear the Sorting Hats sing a song, see the sorting ceremony where Colin Creevey's brother Dennis Creevey gets sorted into Gryffindor, and we find out that house elves work in the kitchens from Nearly Headless Nick, which makes Hermione appalled and she refuses to eat. Then, this is when the book and the movie meet up again, as Dumbledore gives his speech and announces the Triwizard Tournament. In the movie, Barty Crouch was there for this announcement, but in the book, he was not. Also, the Goblet of Fire was not shown that night like in the film. Dumbledore only said that there would be an impartial judge who would select the champions. In the movie, the Beauxbaton and Durmstrang students arrived on the first night, but in the book, they didn't actually arrive until October 30th. Also, in the movie, they mispronounced the name of the French school.
Of the Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic.
But Rowling has revealed that the S at the end is silent, and it's not Beauxbaton, it's Beauxbaton. When Moody walked in the film, he stopped the lightning from the ceiling from striking, but in the book, this didn't happen. Also, in the book, he entered through the huge doors that led to the Great Hall, but in the film, he entered from a back door behind the staff table. In the movie, their first class was Defense Against the Dark Arts, but in the book, they didn't have that until later in the week. They instead start with Herbology and then Care of Magical Creatures, and the Care of Magical Creatures class introduces Blast-Ended Scroots, creatures that were not in the movies at all. In the film, the scene where Moody turns Malfoy into a ferret doesn't happen until November, but in the book, this actually took place in the first week of classes in early September. There's also a few differences with this scene when we compare the book to the movie. 1. This takes place in the entrance hall in the book, while in the movie, it's out in the courtyard. 2. Ron and Hermione were there for this in the book, but they were not present in the movie. 3. The thing that makes Malfoy try to curse Harry in the film was Harry insulting his father, but in the book, it was Harry insulting Malfoy's mother. This is also where we find out Moody can see out of the back of his head with his magical eye, as he saw Crabbe about to pick Malfoy up. In the movie though, we found out about this ability when he yelled at Seamus, not Crabbe, and it was in the classroom, not in the Great Hall.
The old codger can see at the back of his head.
I'm here across classrooms.
In the film, Defense Against the Dark Arts was with the Slytherins, but in the book, it was just with the Gryffindors. In the movie, Moody called on Ron without him raising his hand.
Weasley.
Yes.
But in the book, Ron actually volunteered himself to give one of the unforgivable curses. When Moody used the Imperious Curse in the movie, it made the spider jump on the students and float around based on Moody's wand movements. But this is not how the spell works in the book. That was more like using the Levicorpus spell. In the book, you don't move the being with your wand. You use the Imperious Curse to say what you want them to do, and they do it. Moody did this in the book, making the spider do cartwheels and dance, but it never left the desk, and Moody did not have to guide it with his wand. In the movie, Hermione refused to give the final curse.
Perhaps you could give us the last unforgivable curse, Miss Granger.
But in the book, just like Ron, she volunteered and raised her hand. And while in the movie, Moody was the one to say Avada Kedavra first. In the book, it came out of Hermione's mouth first. In the novel, Harry and Ron see Neville with the herbology book that Moody gave him later that same day. But in the movie, we don't see him with this book until weeks later, well after Harry's name was pulled from the Goblet of Fire.
Magical water plants of the Highland Locks. Yeah, Moody gave it to me.
The movie cuts from the Defense Against the Dark Arts class to people putting their name in the Goblet of Fire, but there's so much that happened in between these two scenes, especially considering the fact that the Goblet of Fire has not been introduced yet, and neither foreign school has arrived at Hogwarts yet. In between these two scenes, we see Fred and George writing a letter in secret, which we later find out was them writing to Ludo Bagman because he gave them leprechaun gold after they won their bet, which if you don't know, disappears after a few hours. So basically they lost their life savings and the money that they won. We also see Hermione form SPEW, or the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, a group that fights for house elf rights. We also see Harry finally get a letter back from Sirius saying that he was coming north to be closer to Hogwarts with all of the weird things happening. On top of that, we see Moody put the class under the Imperious Curse, and Harry is the only student who's able to fight it. And the book and the movie finally meet up again on October 30th, almost 2 months into the school year, when the Beauxbaton and Durmstrang students finally arrive. In the movie, the first time the Hogwarts students see the other school students was in the Great Hall, but in the book, they all greeted them outside on the grounds when they arrived. In the film, the schools did sort of dances when they entered, but they did not do this in the book. That was made just for the movie. Also, in the film, Beauxbaton is an all-girls school and Durmstrang is an all-boys school, but in the book, both schools are co-ed with both boys and girls. While we saw the Goblet of Fire on the first night in the film, which was September 1st, we don't see it until October 30th in the book, the same night that the other schools arrive. Like in the film, Crouch was there for this reveal, but there's also the added detail that Ludo Bagman was there for this as well. But as I said, he was of course cut from the movie entirely, so he was not present for this in the movie. In the book, Dumbledore explains the age line that goes around the Goblet of Fire, but in the movie, Hermione is the one to explain the age line.
You see this? This is an age line. Dumbledore drew it himself.
In the book, Fred, George, and Lee Jordan all take the aging potion, but in the movie, only Fred and George do. Lee, however, does not jump over the age line with the twins because he watched them be thrown back and didn't want the same to happen to him. Also, in the movie, the twins put their names in the goblet, but in the book, they were thrown out before they were even able to do that. In the movie, the twins fought each other after being thrown out, but in the book, they just laughed along with everyone else, including Dumbledore, and they did not fight at all. In the book, the trio went down to Hagrid's the day that the champions would be chosen, and they see him all dressed up, have his hair slicked back, and notice he's wearing cologne. They then realize that he did all of this to impress Madame Maxime. In the movie though, this of course took place much later when Hagrid showed Harry the dragons, and in that case, it was only Harry there, not the whole trio who witnessed this.
Hagrid, have you combed your hair?
And now we get to perhaps the most well-known Harry Potter meme. In the book, Dumbledore calmly asked Harry if he put his name in the Goblet of Fire, but in the film, he yells and grabs Harry in the most uncalm way possible.
"Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire, Harry?" Dumbledore asked calmly.
Harry! I protest! Harry, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?
No, sir.
In the book, this scene also housed the character Ludo Bagman, who was very excited about having a fourth champion, but in the film, he was again absent from this scene. In the movie, the scene ended after Crouch said that Harry had to compete, but in the book, this scene and this night are extended a great deal. We see Crouch give the champions the rules for the tournament. We see Harry walk back with Cedric. See Cedric not believe Harry that he did not put his name in the goblet, but he politely lets it go. And we see Harry go back to the common room where everybody's celebrating. And after an hour of putting up with this, Harry finally goes up to bed. And this is where the book and the movie meet up again, as Harry has that disastrous talk with Ron. The movie added a scene where Dumbledore talks with McGonagall, Mad-Eye, and Snape, but this was obviously not in the book as it's from Harry's point of view, and he wasn't there for this. The movie cuts from Ron and Harry's talk to Rita Skeeter doing the article, but there's a lot that happened in between these two scenes. The next morning, we see Harry and Hermione go for a walk, and Harry is relieved that Hermione believes he did not put his name in the goblet. Hermione then explains that Ron is mad because he's jealous, as he's always in Harry's shadow, and this was just his breaking point. In the movie, Malfoy teases Harry about dying in the tournament out in the courtyard.
I don't think you're going to last 10 minutes in this tournament.
But in the book, this happened during a Care of Magical Creatures lesson. In the movie, we first see the Potter Stinks badges while Harry was walking out into the courtyard. But in the book, we first see these being worn by Slytherin students when Harry arrives at potions class a few days earlier. The movie cut a vital scene here as well, as Harry and Malfoy shoot spells at each other, each one missing and hitting someone else. Harry's spell hit Goyle and Malfoy's hit Hermione, which made her already large buck teeth grow at a rapid rate. Snape then showed up and made fun of Hermione, saying that he saw no difference, which made Harry and Ron yell at him, landing them both in detention, but even still, they do not make up. During that potions lesson, Colin Creevey showed up to take Harry out of class, and this is where the novel and the movie meet up again, as he goes to the meeting for the Daily Prophet with Rita Skeeter. The second half of this scene was cut off in the movie though, as it ends halfway through the interview with Rita Skeeter. In the book though, Dumbledore saves Harry from this interview, and we see Ollivander, the wand maker that made Harry's wand, check each champion's wand to make sure they're alright for the tournament. Then they do a photo shoot, which is different from the film, as the film started the scene with the photo shoot instead of ending with it. In both the book and the movie, the scene that follows is Harry getting a letter from Sirius, and Sirius gives him a time and date of when they will talk in the common room. But while in the film he got this letter in the Owlery, in the book he got it while he was in the Gryffindor common room. The film cut an entire segment where there's a Hogsmeade trip. Harry goes in with Hermione, but he insisted on wearing his invisibility cloak so no one would bother him. Here we find out that Moody can see through the invisibility cloak with his magical eye. While in the Three Broomsticks, this is when Hagrid tells Harry to meet him in the forest that night. But in the film, Hagrid did not tell Harry this directly. It went through a number of people.
Ronald would like me to tell you that Seamus told him that Dean was told by Pavati that Hagrid's looking for you.
In the movie, Harry going into the forest with Hagrid and Harry talking with Sirius were two different nights. But in the book, this was the same night. In the movie, Maxime meets them in the forest, but in the book, Harry and Hagrid pick her up at her carriage. Harry is of course under the invisibility cloak though. In the scene in the book, we actually see Charlie Weasley and he talks to Hagrid, but in the film, Charlie isn't seen, he's just mentioned.
Brother Charlie have to bring him over from Romania.
In the film, the dragons were in their own cages, but in the book, the dragons were just out in the open, not locked up, but tied down. The film also says that Ron had seen the dragons in the movie.
Poor Ron nearly fainted just see them, you know.
Ron was here.
But that was not the case in the book. Ron never saw the dragons or his brother until the day of the first task. Harry then raced back to the castle, and that's when he had his chat with Sirius. There's also the added detail that on his way back, Harry ran into Karkaroff, who was off cheating for crumbs, seeing what was in store for the first task. But again, Harry was under his invisibility cloak, so Karkaroff did not see him. Going back to Sirius and Harry's conversation, in the book, there's the added detail of Sirius talking about the disappearance of Bertha Jorkins. Sirius was also about to tell Harry how to beat a dragon, but this could not happen in the film, as Harry did not yet know that this was what the first task entailed, because in the film, the scene where he finds this out takes place after this one. Before Sirius could tell him though, Ron showed up and Sirius left. This happened in the film as well, but in the book, there's the added detail of Harry throwing a Potter Stinks badge at him, while in the movie, they just had a back and forth in dialogue. When Harry told Cedric what was to come in the first task, this took place in the hallway, but in the film, this was of course set out in the courtyard. The movie cut right from Moody telling Harry to play to his strengths to the first task. But in between these two scenes in the book, we see McGonagall allow Harry and Hermione to use her classroom, and while in there, we see Harry master the summoning charm with the help of Hermione, allowing himself to get his firebolt while in the arena.
Accio Firebolt!
In the book, Hermione and Rita Skeeter did not come back to the tent, and the picture of Harry and Hermione was not taken. Though Rita did write an article about them, but it was actually paired with the interview she had with Harry in the broom cupboard, so that happened much earlier. In the movie, Crouch gave the players the instructions, but in the book, it was Ludo Bagman to do this. Also, in the movie, Dumbledore was the one to announce the first task.
And now our fourth and final contestant.
But in the book, it was again Bagman. One thing that the film left out before the task was Bagman offering Harry help, basically cheating, which we later find out he does because he was betting a huge amount of money on Harry winning. The first task in the movie is terrible. It was very overplayed as the dragon escapes. Harry and the dragon both leave the stadium, they destroy the school, Harry almost dies several times with no teachers or dragon tamers intervening, and the dragon appears to fall to its death. And if it's not dead, then a dragon is set loose in the school. But none of this happened in the book. If it had, the task would have been stopped right away, especially when the dragon got loose. Instead, Harry just drew the dragon away from the eggs by flying over her, and as soon as she went up a bit, Harry swooped down and got the egg. Also, in the movie, there was only one golden egg, but in the book, the golden egg was among the real mother's dragon eggs. Harry got the fastest time of all the champions, the reason why he came in first place. And he came in first place in the movie too, but that's sort of a plot hole, because he definitely took the most time out of all the champions with all of the unnecessary additions outside of the arena. That had to have taken up so much time, and for the movie, if we take that into account, he should have come into last place, not first. The movie cuts right from Harry getting the egg to the party in the Gryffindor common room, but there's a lot that happens in between these two scenes. We see Harry get taken to a medical tent where Madame Pomfrey tends to a cut on his shoulder, and here is where we see Ron and Harry make up, whereas in the movie they did this in the Gryffindor common room during the party. Also in the book, Hermione cries when the two make up, but in the film she merely says,
"Boys."
We then see Bagman give the champions the instructions for the next task, which was a scene that actually took place before the first task in the film, rather than after it like in the book.
Collect the egg. This you must do, for each egg contains a clue without which you cannot hope to proceed to the next task.
And in the film, it was said by Crouch, while in the book it was said by Bagman. And another thing that takes place in between these two scenes is the trio first going to the Owlery to fill Sirius in on what happened with the first task, and then that's when they go to the party in the common room. The movie transitions from the party in the common room to the introduction to the Yule Ball, but again, a lot happens in between these two events in the book. We see a Care of Magical Creatures class go terribly wrong as the blast-ended Scroots get out, and while the other students hide in Hagrid's hut, the trio helps Hagrid round them up. Rita Skeeter then shows up, and she convinced Hagrid to give her an interview, and in that interview, she tries to get dirt on Harry, but Hagrid refuses and gives her nothing but good things to say about him. Before the Yule Ball sequence, we also see the trio go down to the Hogwarts kitchens, and there they see Dobby and Winky, both of whom work there, and both of whom were cut from the movie entirely. The book and the movie meet up again when McGonagall announces the Yule Ball. She tells them this after a Transfiguration class though, so it was just the Gryffindor 4th years. Fred and George were not there like in the movie. Also, the scene where Ron and Minerva dance was made just for the film. That did not happen in the book. In the novel, McGonagall tells Harry to stay after class, and here she tells him that he and his partner will open the ball with the first dance, something that differs from the film, because in the film, McGonagall actually forgot to tell him this, telling him only moments before.
It's traditional that the 3 champions, well in this case 4, are the first to dance. Surely I told you that?
No.
Oh, well now you know.
The movie left out the fact that several girls asked Harry to the ball, but he said no to all of them because he had Cho on his mind. The movie showed Neville being super intrigued by the dancing, being the only boy to stand up, and then later practicing by himself, but none of that happened in the book. That was made just for the movie. The scene where the twins ask Harry and Ron who they're asking to the dance takes place in the Gryffindor common room, whereas in the film, it takes place in the Great Hall while they were doing classwork for Snape. This scenario never happened in the book, because the trio would never have a class with Fred and George, as they were 2 years older, so the twins already took all the classes that the trio would be taking at that time. This also meant that the scene where Snape keeps pushing Harry and Ron's head never happened. That was again just made for the film. During that scene is when Harry and Ron make their pact.
Tonight when we get back to the common room, we'll both have partners. Agreed?
Agreed.
But in the book, they don't make this pact until several days later. The book allowed for Fred and George's words to sit and resonate with them, which made them even more desperate, hence making that pact. In the film, Harry asked Cho out in the Owlery when she was all alone, but in the book, he had to pull her away from her friends, and he asked her not in the Owlery, but in the hallway. Cho also tells Harry who she's going with in the book, but in the movie, she never mentions that it's Cedric that asked her out first. In the movie, Ron asked Hermione to the ball before he embarrassingly asked Fleur out, but in the book, he asked Hermione after asking Fleur in the common room. This is also why Hermione freaked out the way she did, which wasn't quite executed right in the film. The film made it look like Hermione sort of overreacted, but in the book, she was mad because only after being rejected did he even consider her. While in the film, she was actually the first person that Ron asked, so she didn't really have a reason to freak out the way she did like in the book. In the movie, Harry saw both Padma and Parvati Patil walking by, and that gives him the idea to ask the twins out for himself and Ron. However, in the book, Padma was actually in Ravenclaw, not Gryffindor, so she was not in the Gryffindor common room. Instead, Harry saw Parvati and Lavender walking by, and he asked Parvati out for himself and asked Parvati if she thought her sister Padma would go with Ron. The movie cuts from Harry asking the Patils out straight to the night of the Yule Ball, but there was actually an entire week before that in the book. During that week that was cut from the film, we see Ron question Hermione every chance he gets, asking her who she's going to the ball with, but she refuses to say. We also see Fred and George start selling their joke candy at a rapid rate. And on top of that, we see Ron notice that Hermione's buck teeth are smaller than they used to be, which was the result of Hermione telling Madame Pomfrey to keep shrinking them to less than their original size after Malfoy cursed her. The ball took place on Christmas Day, but the movie skipped over the whole day leading up to it. The morning started with Dobby waking Harry, Ron, Dean, Seamus, and Neville up, and they all opened up their presents. Ron gave Dobby the sweater his mother knitted him that year, which was a huge deal to Dobby, and Dobby gave Harry 2 hand-knitted socks, one with broomsticks on them and the other with golden snitches on them. Harry then spends the day eating, playing, and having a snowball fight. In the movie, Harry and Ron meet both of the Patil twins downstairs, but in the book, they walk down with Parvati and meet only Padma downstairs. In the movie, Hermione walked down the steps and Harry immediately knew it was her. But in the book, she walked in with Krum and the Durmstrang students, and she looked so different and so pretty that Harry did not even realize it was her. It's not until McGonagall calls the champions and their dates over that he realizes that the girl with Krum is Hermione. Also, Hermione was wearing a blue dress in the book, but in the movie it was of course pink. Also, Harry's dress robes were green in the book, Mrs. Weasley picking that color so they would bring his green eyes out, but in the movie they were just black. There was so much more to the Yule Ball than the movie showed. We first saw them all eat dinner, which the film skipped over, going straight to the dancing. We also see Percy Weasley at the ball, who had taken Barty Crouch's place, telling Harry that Crouch had fallen very ill. In the film, besides the first dance that he was forced to do, Harry did not dance at all for the rest of the night. But in the book, Harry and Parvati actually danced a bit before sitting down with Ron and Padma. In the movie, a Durmstrang boy asked Parvati to dance, but in the book, it was actually a Beauxbaton boy. Also, in the book, Parvati asked Harry if it was alright, and he said yes, but in the movie, she rudely just went without asking and sort of dissed Harry. In both the book and the movie, Hermione storms off after Ron and Hermione have a back and forth, but in the film, it then cuts to them having another fight as the ball comes to an end. However, there's a lot that happens in between these two scenes. After Hermione storms off, Harry and Ron go outside together, and here, they overhear a few conversations. First, they hear Snape and Karkaroff talking about something getting clearer, and we later find out that they're talking about the dark mark on their arms. This was actually in a deleted scene, but it did not make it into the final cut of the movie. Then we see Harry and Ron overhear a conversation between Hagrid and Maxime, where Hagrid admits to being a half-giant, and when he asks Maxime which of her parents was a giant, she gets offended, says she's not half-giant, just big-boned, and storms off. This is very different from the movie, as Maxime and Hagrid are seen to have a good ending to the night, both dancing together with smiles on their faces. As Harry was going upstairs to bed with Ron, Cedric called him over and gave him a tip about the clue in the egg, a scene that took place a few days later in the movie, and instead of being with Ron, Harry was with Hermione, and instead of being on the bridge like in the film, this took place in the entrance hall. Then, this is where the book and the movie meet up again, as Ron and Hermione have their big explosive fight. In the movie, this also took place in the entrance hall, but in the book, this fight took place in the Gryffindor common room. In the film, Harry had a nightmare about Voldemort that night. But this did not happen in the book. That whole nightmare was just made for the film, and I'm going to come back to this later in the video. After Cedric gave Harry the clue about the egg in the film, it cuts to Harry taking up Cedric's offer in the prefect's bathroom. But in the novel, there's a lot that happens in between these two scenes, as Harry was adamant on not taking Cedric's help now that he was officially dating Cho Chang, the girl that Harry liked. In between these two scenes in the book, we see Hagrid not show up to teach, as Rita Skeeter released an article outing Hagrid as a half-giant. A week goes by of Hagrid hiding in his cabin, and one day while in Hogsmeade, Harry and Hermione confront Rita Skeeter about the article she wrote on Hagrid. Rita gets angry with Hermione, calls her a silly little girl, and then storms off. Hermione then vows to get revenge on Rita for what she's done. The trio then go to Hagrid's hut and bang on the door until Dumbledore opens it, and together, the trio and Dumbledore cheer Hagrid up, making him agree to come out of his hut and teach again. After lying and telling both Hermione and Hagrid that he figured out the egg, Harry decides he has to accept Cedric's help, and this is where the book and the movie meet up again plot-wise. The song that the egg sings in the movie skips over a few verses that were in the novel. I would play the actual song, but the artist that made it for Warner Brothers claimed the video, saying that they would make all the money from the video just because I put this in, so I'm just gonna do a voiceover and speak what the movie would have said. It says, "Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground." But it then skips over, "And while you're searching, ponder this, we've taken what you'll sorely miss." In both the book and the movie, it continues saying, "An hour long you'll have to look to recover what we took." But while it ends there in the movie, in the book, it continues on saying, "But past an hour the prospect's black, too late it's gone, it won't come back." In the film, the night ends there, but in the book, this night held a few more surprises. As Harry leaves the bathroom, he sees Barty Crouch on the Marauder's map and notices he's in Snape's office, which is weird as he was told Crouch was very sick by Percy. Harry decides to investigate, but halfway down the staircase, he steps through a trick step and gets stuck there. Luckily though, he was still under his invisibility cloak. Unluckily though, he dropped the egg and the Marauder's map, making a huge bang and alerting both Filch and Snape, who arrive on scene. Mad-Eye Moody then shows up, and Harry remembers that he can see through his invisibility cloak. Moody ends up covering for Harry, recovering both the map from Snape and the egg from Filch. When the two leave, Moody pulls Harry out of the staircase, and Harry tells Moody how he saw Barty Crouch on the map. This intrigues Moody, and he asks Harry if he can borrow the map. We later find out why, as he himself was the Barty Crouch that Harry saw, and he did not want Harry to figure that out, so he took the map. The night before the second task, Fred and George come to collect Ron and Hermione, but in the film, it was Mad-Eye who came to collect them. In the movie, Neville tells Harry about gillyweed.
But you can always use gillyweed.
But in the book, Neville did not interact with Harry at all that night. Instead, Harry fell asleep and was woken up 10 minutes before the task by Dobby. Then, it's Dobby that gives Harry the gillyweed, not Neville. In the film, the champions and the crowd all go onto these metal stands in the middle of the lake. But in the book, they're not in the middle of the lake, but on the shore. This meant that the champions did not dive in, but rather ran in like they were on a beach. In the film, Harry jumped out of the water to great applause from Seamus and Dean. But in the novel, this never happened. Once again, Dumbledore is the announcer in the movie.
Welcome to the second task.
But in the book, it was again Bagman, just like in the first task. In the film, Harry found the hostages first just by coincidence, but in the book, he found them so fast because Moaning Myrtle pointed him in the right direction. In the book, we see a whole village square full of houses that belong to the Mer people, but in the film, we never saw this village. The Mer people were just seen standing guard of the hostages. In the book, Harry used a rock to cut the ropes off of Ron's leg, but in the movie, he just untied it. In the film, Crumb used his shark teeth to cut the rope on Hermione, but in the novel, Harry gave him the sharp rock he had used to free Ron, as he did not want Crumb to accidentally bite Hermione's leg off. In the movie, Harry sent Ron and Gabrielle up without him, and then shot himself out of the water a little bit later. But in the book, he kept the two by his side the whole time, and he did not shoot himself out, but simply swam until his head hit the surface. The film left out a few things that happen on the dock. We see Crumb get jealous of Hermione talking to Harry, as she sort of just brushes Crumb off. Also, in the movie, Dumbledore just somehow knew that Harry tried to save all of the hostages, but in the book, there was the added detail of the Mer people coming to the surface to explain this to Dumbledore. Also in the film, Cedric, Crumb, and Harry all made it within the time limit, but in the novel, Cedric was 1 minute outside the time limit, and Crumb and Harry were well outside the time limit. In the movie, we cut to a scene where Harry talks to Crouch and then Moody interrupts them. Moody then flicks his tongue, which shocks Barty Crouch. As we later find out, this is what his son was known to do. However, none of this happened in the book, and the tongue flick thing that Barty Jr. did was made just for the movie. The film then cuts to the scene where Barty Crouch was found dead, but there are a ton of things that happened before this in the book. We see an article by Rita Skeeter get published about Harry's heartache, as Hermione is now dating Crumb and broke Harry's heart. In the film, this article was mentioned much earlier, as it came out before even the Yule Ball took place.
Miss Granger, a plain but ambitious girl, seems to be developing a taste for famous wizards.
In the book, though, there was the added detail of Rita somehow knowing that Crumb asked Hermione to visit him that summer, which made Hermione question how she knew this, as this was said on the dock after the second task, and Rita was nowhere to be seen when this was said. In one potions class, Snape forces Harry to sit right in front of his desk, and this is where Snape accuses Harry of stealing from his office and threatens Harry with Veritaserum, a scene that happened much later in the movie as it took place right before the third task, but in the book, that was still months away. Before that scene in the movie, Karkaroff had been showing Snape his dark mark, but in the book, that event happened after Snape threatened Harry with Veritaserum, and also this took place at the front of Snape's classroom, not in Snape's closet. The movie cut an entire scene that involves Sirius, where the trio meets the dog version of Sirius at the edge of Hogsmeade Village, and they go up to a cave on the outskirts of the town. Here, Sirius tells the trio about Barty Crouch's past and how he sent his own son to Azkaban, lines that were given to Dumbledore in the film.
Mr. Crouch's son. What exactly happened to him?
He was sent to Azkaban. Destroyed Barty to do it.
Sirius goes into more detail though, explaining Crouch's rise to power until this scandal, which pretty much ruined his shot at being Minister of Magic. He then tells the trio that Barty Jr. died a year after going to Azkaban. There are many more events that take place before Crouch's death that the film left out, including the trio going down to the kitchens where they see a very drunk Winky. Hermione gets hate mail for breaking Harry's heart, some of which actually physically harmed her, all because of the article that Rita Skeeter wrote. We see Hermione receive almost nothing for Easter from Mrs. Weasley, while Ron and Harry get huge eggs filled with sweets, and the trio agrees that Mrs. Weasley probably read Rita's article and believed it. One day, McGonagall told Harry to go to the Quidditch pitch, and here, Harry and the other champions find out what the third task will entail, a maze filled with many obstacles. And now, this is where the book and the movie meet up again, and we get to Crouch's death. How this happened is very different when we compare the book to the movie though. In the film, Harry just finds Crouch's dead body in the woods, but in the book, he actually finds Crouch very much alive, but absolutely crazy. In the movie, Harry was with Hagrid, Ron, and Hermione when he found Crouch, but in the book, Harry was with Crumb. Harry ran to get Dumbledore and brought him to the forest, but when they got there, Crouch was gone and Crumb was unconscious. Moody then showed up, and as Hagrid takes Harry back to the castle, Moody searches the grounds for Crouch, but according to him, he had no luck. After Crouch's death scene in the movie, it cuts to Harry going to Dumbledore's office, but there's a lot that happens in between these two scenes. While in divination, Harry falls asleep and has a dream where he sees what Voldemort sees. He tells Wormtail that luckily his blunder did not mess everything up, as Barty Sr. was dead. Voldemort then uses the torture curse on Wormtail, and Harry wakes up having a fit on the floor of the divination classroom. This is when the book and the movie meet up again, as Harry decides to go to Dumbledore's office. Just like in the movie, the adults leave in the book, but instead of Harry finding the licorice schnapps when they leave like in the film, he's instead greeted by Fawkes the Phoenix, and they have a nice moment. A much better scene than Harry getting snapped at by Candy if you ask me. I don't know why they decided to add that in, because it's literally pointless and never happened in the book. And on top of that, it took away a nice moment with a creature / character that we hadn't seen in a while. In both the book and the movie, Harry falls into the pensive and arrives at Karkaroff's trial. However, in the book, Karkaroff merely sits in a chair guarded by 2 Dementors, while in the film, he's trapped behind bars. In both the book and the film, Karkaroff gave up names of Death Eaters, but one name that he gave up in the movie that he did not in the book was Barty Crouch Jr. The scene ends in the book after he gives up Snape's name and Dumbledore defends Snape, and it then dissolves to a different trial on a different day, this time for Ludo Bagman, and this trial was of course cut from the movie. Here, Bagman is accused of passing information to Death Eaters, but he pleads he had no idea that they were Death Eaters, and ultimately he's let off the hook. The scene then dissolves to another trial that again was not in the film. This time, it's for 4 different people: Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Sebastian Lestrange, and also Barty Crouch Jr., which differs from the film, because in the movie, Crouch Jr. was not a prisoner, but a spectator in the crowd. Crouch states that the 4 of them are there for the torture of Alice and Frank Longbottom, information that in the film was given to the audience by Karkaroff, not Crouch.
And by means of the Cruciatus curse, torture of the horror Frank Longbottom and his wife! Name!
After they're convicted, Barty Jr. is brought before his father just like in the film. However, he has a completely different demeanor. In the film, he admits to his crimes in a very confident way, but in the book, he's crying and pleads with his father, saying that he's innocent. In the movie, we see Dumbledore get mad and start yelling about trying to find a memory.
Every time I get close to an answer, it slips away. It's maddening.
But in the book, Dumbledore remains calm throughout the whole conversation, the way Dumbledore is supposed to be. And instead of uncharacteristically whining about his own problems, he listens to what Harry has to say. In both the book and the movie, Harry tells Dumbledore about a dream he had, but in the book, he refers to the dream of Voldemort torturing Wormtail that he just had in divination, while in the film, he tells Dumbledore about a reoccurring dream he has, which was the dream in the first scene of the movie and the dream after the Yule Ball. Harry then mentions that he saw Barty Jr. in his dream.
And Wormtail was there too, and Mr. Crouch's son.
But as I said before, in the book, Barty Jr. was not in that dream. Harry then asks,
Have there been others like this dream?
Yes. Always the same one. These dreams, what I see, you don't think it's actually happening, do you?
But this is pretty dumb of the movie, because if it was happening in real time, why the hell would it be the same dream over and over again? If that was the case, it would be different each time. No dream would be the same. In the book though, these dreams really were happening in real time, and Harry was seeing into Voldemort's mind during the time of the dream. In the film, this is where the scene ends. But in the novel, Harry and Dumbledore's conversation continues, and Dumbledore says that Harry connects with Voldemort when Voldemort gets very angry or has extreme emotions. Harry then asks if the trial to do with Alice and Frank Longbottom were Neville's parents, and Dumbledore confirms this, saying that Alice and Frank were tortured into insanity, now live in St. Mungo's hospital, and that neither of them are able to even recognize Neville. Dumbledore asks Harry to keep this information to himself though and focus on the third task. On the day of the third task in the movie, it cuts right to the event, but it leaves out what happened earlier that day. Harry wakes up to an article by Rita Skeeter that talks about Harry collapsing in divination, says that his scar hurts him sometimes, that he's friends with werewolves and giants, says that he speaks Parseltongue, and insinuates that because of all of this, he's unstable and possibly dangerous. We also see Hermione run off to the library having discovered something about Rita Skeeter. Harry gets the surprise of Mrs. Weasley and Bill showing up to support him as his family, and he spends the rest of the day with them. During the day, Harry assures Mrs. Weasley that he and Hermione never dated and that everything Rita Skeeter wrote about them was false, and immediately, Mrs. Weasley began to be nicer to Hermione. The book and the movie meet up again that night when it's time for the third task. In the film, Dumbledore gave the champions the instructions, but in the book, it was again Ludo Bagman who did this instead. In the film, Mad Eye told Harry which way to go, but that did not happen in the book. In the movie, the maze is gigantic and spans off into what looks like the forest, but in the book, it was not that big as it was confined to just the Quidditch pitch. The third task was drastically different when we compare the book to the movie. In the movie, the maze itself is the obstacle, and it's actually alive. But in the novel, the thing they had to get by was not the maze itself, but the obstacles in the maze. In the film, Harry found Fleur after she screamed, but in the book, he never actually found her body like in the film. In the movie, it's Krum who took Fleur down, but later on in the book, we discover that Moody, or Barty Jr., was the one to take her down, not Krum. In the movie, Victor's eyes glaze over when he's under the Imperius Curse, but that was not the case in the book. This is actually really stupid on the filmmaker's part, because if someone's eyes are glazed over while under the Imperius Curse, it's very obvious that they're under it, and that just contradicts the whole idea of no one knowing if people like Lucius Malfoy were actually under the Imperius Curse or were acting on their own. A point that was not only in the book, but that was actually stated in the movie.
Scores of witches and wizards have claimed that they only did you-know-who's bidding under the influence of the Imperius Curse. But here's the rub. How do we sort out the liars?
Zero thought was put into this. They just thought the glazed over eyes would look cool, so they stupidly put it in without really thinking about it. In the book, we see Victor use the torture curse on Cedric, but in the film, he does not do this, as Cedric knocks him to the ground before he gets the chance. On top of that, in the book, Harry is the one to knock Krum out, not Cedric. In the film, Cedric is brought down by the vines, but in the book, he was brought down by a giant spider instead. In both the book and the movie, Harry saves Cedric from each threat, whether it be the vines or the spider. But in the book, Harry breaks his leg in the process, which was a detail that the film left out, and something that makes the rest of his night even more difficult. When they enter the graveyard in the film, Harry said,
"I've been here before, in a dream."
But in the book, he did not say this, as he truly did not remember his dream well enough to match this graveyard with that graveyard. In the novel, Wormtail tied Harry to the gravestone and gagged him, but in the film, the gravestone itself was the thing that held him there, not the ropes. Also, he was not gagged in the film. In the movie, the cauldron morphed into Voldemort's body, but in the book, the cauldron stayed in place and Voldemort just stepped out of it. When the Death Eaters arrive in the book, they kiss Voldemort's feet before forming a circle around him, but in the film, they do not kiss his feet, they just go straight into the circle. In both the book and the movie, Voldemort explains his journey, but he goes into much more detail in the book, explaining his time of jumping from animal to animal in the forest, to his time while on the back of Quirrell's head, and he then explains how he used the information Bertha Jorkins gave him to form a plan of getting Harry to the graveyard that night. When Voldemort let Harry down to duel, the movie left out the detail of Harry successfully fighting off Voldemort's Imperius curse. During their duel in the book, Harry and Voldemort were actually lifted off the ground, floated in the air for a bit, and then touched down far away from the gravestones. But obviously that did not happen in the movie. In the book, the dome that formed around them was gold and it crisscrossed, while in the movie, it was just a clear blue dome. In the book, we hear a Phoenix song, which was sparked by their wand cores, and I'll touch on that in a minute. In both the book and the movie, Voldemort's past victims shoot out of his wand, but in the book, Bertha Jorkins is among them, but she was left out of the film. In the movie, Dumbledore is the one to try and pry Harry's body off of Cedric, but in the book, it's Fudge that does this, not Dumbledore. To manhandle Harry like that was so out of character for the calm headmaster. The movie made a much bigger deal about Amos seeing his son's dead body as he says,
That's my son! That's my boy! My boy! No! No!
But none of these lines were in the book. In the film, Harry realizes that Moody is bad with the gravestone line.
In the graveyard were there others?
I don't think I said anything about a graveyard, Professor.
But that line was not in the book, that was made just for the film. In the book, Harry realized he was bad because Moody, or Barty Jr., actually came out and said it, as he did not want others like Karkaroff to take credit for all of his hard work. In the movie, Moody talks about how he successfully planted the book with Neville so that Harry could figure out the second task with the gillyweed.
Do you think Neville Longbottom, the witless wonder, could have provided you with gillyweed if I hadn't given him the book that led him straight to it?
But in the book, he talks about how this plan actually failed because of Harry's pride, as Harry refused to ask anyone for help. Moody then goes on to say how he purposefully made Dobby overhear his conversation with McGonagall talking about gillyweed instead. When Dumbledore enters in the book, he screams and looks terrifying, and this is the first time Harry understands why Dumbledore is the only man Voldemort ever feared. However, in the movie, this scene doesn't mean a damn thing, because Dumbledore screams like this throughout the entire movie.
Silence! If chosen, there's no turning back.
Harry Potter!
Quiet! Harry, you put your name in a goblet of fire. Doesn't help, Alistair.
I want all the judges over here now! Attention!
Stop it for once, show themselves.
Today's no more a Death Eater than I am.
You see, Harry, I've searched and searched for something. Some small detail.
Every time I get close to an answer, it slips away. It's maddening.
So this scene is made much less important and much less shocking. In the book, it was just Harry and Dumbledore there when Barty Jr. transforms, as Dumbledore had sent McGonagall and Snape off before this, but the two professors were of course present for the transformation in the movie. In the book, Moody was unconscious when they opened the trunk, but in the film he was awake.
I'm sorry, Albus.
The scene with Barty Jr. pretty much ends there in the movie, but in the book, there was much more to this scene that was pretty vital to the plot. We see Snape give Barty Veritaserum, and he admits to everything. Escaping Azkaban with the help of his parents, his mother taking his place in prison where she died, making everyone think he was dead as she took Polyjuice Potion to look like him. He admits to casting the Dark Mark at the Quidditch World Cup, kidnapping the real Moody right before school, plotting with Voldemort to get Harry in the graveyard that night, and killing his father. How he killed his father in the book and the movie differ though, as in the film, he just used the killing curse on him and left his body there. But in the book, after he killed his father with the killing curse, he transfigured his body into a bone and then buried it outside of Hagrid's hut. In the movie, Dumbledore says,
Send an owl to Azkaban. Think they'll find I'm missing a prisoner?
But this differs from the book because Barty Jr. was not a prisoner. As I said, he was thought to have died over a decade ago, so no one at the prison would be looking for him. In the movie, Dumbledore aggressively grabs Harry's very cut arm and hurts him, but the calm and wise Dumbledore from the book did not, nor would he ever do this. In the movie, that's where the night ends, in Moody's office. After the scene with Barty, it cuts to the next day, but in the book, we see much more from this night. Dumbledore takes Harry to his office, and there they meet Sirius and fill him in. This is where Dumbledore explained Priori Incantatem, which in the film he does not do for another few days.
Priori Incantatem. You saw your parents that night, didn't you?
Also, the film failed to explain why this happened. In the book, Dumbledore says that this happened because Harry and Voldemort's wands were twins, as both had a feather from Fawkes the Phoenix as its core, and that was why Phoenix Song came out during their duel. Dumbledore says that when this happens, it causes the most recent spells to regurgitate, thus spitting out Voldemort's most recent murder victims. While in the office, Fawkes also healed Harry's injuries with his tears, including Harry's broken leg. They then go to the hospital wing, Sirius in his dog form, and there they meet Ron, Hermione, Bill, and Molly, and Harry is told to spend the night here. While there though, a whole lot of drama goes down that was not in the movie. McGonagall and Fudge enter yelling at each other, as Barty Jr. had just gotten the Dementor's kiss thanks to Fudge bringing the Dementors with him. And this makes Barty Jr.'s fate differ from book to movie. In the movie, he was sent off to Azkaban still in his right mind, but in the book, he was sent there with a lost mind and a lost soul. Having Barty Jr. be sent off to Azkaban was actually a terrible decision on the movie's part, and I say this because had he been in his right mind, he absolutely would have been freed by Voldemort with Bellatrix and the many other Death Eaters in the next book and film, and hence why that's such an important detail that the movie left out. Dumbledore and Fudge then get into an argument, as Dumbledore tells him that Voldemort is back, but Fudge refuses to believe him, a plot point that is not brought up in this film. It's not until the next film that this is mentioned.
Cornelius, I implore you to see reason. The evidence that the Dark Lord has returned is incontrovertible. He's not back.
Fudge then discredits Harry based on Rita Skeeter's article about him, meaning everything Harry has to say is irrelevant to him. Dumbledore then gives Fudge advice on how to proceed, but Fudge refuses, and this makes Dumbledore end their relationship. In the film, we never saw Snape's dark mark, but in the book, Snape showed it to Fudge to try and convince him, but Fudge still refused to listen. After Fudge leaves, Sirius goes into his human form, and Dumbledore forces Snape and Sirius to shake hands, as they were now on the same side. He then sends Sirius off to gather up the old crowd, meaning the members of the Order of the Phoenix, and he sends Snape off to confront Voldemort, making Snape a double agent. All of this was of course left out of the movie though. After they all left, Harry began to cry as he recalled the events of that night, specifically Cedric's death, and Mrs. Weasley comforts him and hugs him, and Harry for the first time in his memory felt a mother's embrace. The movie cuts right from that night to the final feast in Cedric's honor, but there's a lot that happens in between these two scenes as several days go by. Harry tries to give his Triwizard earnings, which was a load of gold, to the Diggories, but they refuse. We see the trio visit Hagrid, and Hagrid tells Harry that he was brave just like his father James. Hagrid then tells the trio that he and Maxime are going on a top secret mission that summer for Dumbledore. Then, this is when the book and the movie meet up, as the final feast rolls around. In Dumbledore's speech during the feast, he says how important it is to rely on friends and loved ones, something that in the film he tells Harry in private.
Remember this. You have friends here. You're not alone.
Also, this whole scene in the movie where Harry and Dumbledore talk in the dormitory did not occur in the novel. That was made just for the film. In both the book and the movie, we see everyone say their goodbyes, but there are some added details that the movie left out, like Crumb not only pulling Hermione aside, but Harry too, talking about Cedric's death and saying that he really likes Cedric. They also cut out Ron awkwardly asking for Crumb's autograph. The movie ends as the trio watches the foreign schools leave, and as they talk, Ron says,
"Promise you'll write this summer. Both of you."
I won't. You know I won't.
But this line was not said in the book. The Ron from the book would never say something like this. The movies constantly make Ron seem like such a jerk when really he's not at all. He of course wrote to Hermione all summer and even hung out with her for many weeks during the holiday. So why they would add this pointless line that paints Ron in such a bad light just shows how much the movies disrespected Ron's character. Well, the movie ended there. In the book, we follow them as they go on the Hogwarts Express, and here, Hermione reveals a jar with a beetle in it, and she says that this is actually Rita Skeeter, who was an unregistered animagus, and that's how she kept getting her stories. She just sat around in her beetle form. Obviously though, the movie never touched on this arc for Rita. While on the train, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle show up, and Harry, Ron, Hermione, as well as Fred and George, who were in the hallway, hex all of them at the same time, and they collapse looking terrible. They then push them out of their compartment and go along with their day on the train. The twins tell the trio about Ludo Bagman not paying them and how this made them lose their life savings. Because of this, Harry decides to give Fred and George his Triwizard winnings so they can start their joke shop, which was not mentioned in this film or any of the films for that matter. The book then ends as Harry says goodbye to everyone at King's Cross and walks out with Uncle Vernon. And there you have it, every difference between the fourth book and movie. Stay tuned for part 5 where I dissect the Order of the Phoenix, the longest book in the series. It's gonna be some fun. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm just here to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed to the left. If you want to be featured on the next video, plus get a bunch of other things like previews and behind the scenes, become a patron today. Also, you can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life, like my cute dog Loki. I also do some fun stuff on TikTok and Twitter that I think you guys would really enjoy if you enjoy what I do here on this channel. As always, if you liked the video, hit that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great Movie Flame videos on the way.